Let's get to Manchester United. They're in the market for a number of positions, aren't they, when the transfer window opens in the summer? Let's go live to our reporter, Daniel Khan. Always lovely to see you, Dan. Look, what is Manchester United's main priority, would you say?
Yeah, afternoon, Vicky. It might not come as much of a surprise to you, but it is the midfield. After this resurgence under Michael Carrick, quite incredible over the last few months, when you consider they were 6th in January, quite a few points off a Champions League position. They now found themselves 3rd and quite a bit ahead of the likes of Liverpool and Chelsea, trying to chase them down. Now they are preparing for a return to European football next season. That does look like it is Champions League football, which means they need to expand their squad, but look to reinforce it as well. And midfield is the priority. What I can tell you from my understanding, the latest on that, is they still continue to have strong interest in trying to bring a 6 and an 8. Let's talk about the 8 first, and Elliot Anderson pretty much is top of that list. Now, from the Nottingham Forest side and from the player perspective, we understand that he won't be really considering his future until after the World Cup. If it looks very likely as it is, that he'll be selected for Thomas Tuchel's side. Why is that? Well, he's part of a relegation fight with Nottingham Forest, so he's incredibly focused on that. But Manchester United, he would be their ideal number 8. We've seen how impressive he has been this season. Whether they can get that over the line this summer after the World Cup, Manchester City also strong contenders for him. From Manchester United's perspective, they're not going to want to lose another player to Manchester City. Antoine Semenyo picked them in January, so that's very interesting to watch. Other 8 in that position might be the likes of Adam Wharton at Crystal Palace to look out for as well. You look at the number 6 position with Casemiro leaving the club in the summer with his contract expiring. They need someone to replace those defensive qualities the Brazilian brings to the team, and I think ideally that is Carlos Baleba of Brighton. United had strong interest in him last summer. We also reported in January they made tentative inquiries around his availability. Now, it's interesting what Mark, Keith and Alan were talking about in terms of transfers in a World Cup year. Manchester United, remember, got Matheus Cunha sealed, signed, delivered well before the transfer window even opened last season because of his release clause. They were able to get some business done quite early on, and maybe with Baleba not involved in the World Cup with Cameroon, and also just maybe with a dip in his performance this year, perhaps his value was arguably lowered a little bit as well. So maybe Manchester United will be really interested in trying to negotiate a lower fee with Brighton, get that deal earlier done in the window. Also have to talk about Sandro Tonali. He's been in the news quite a lot in the last week or so. Now, Keith makes a great point. Whether this is from an agent perspective, whether Newcastle make Champions League football or not, what I can tell you is, again, he's very high up on the Manchester United list of midfielders. Now, whether that is something in the action in the summer, we will wait and see, but he certainly does have his admirers at Old Trafford in the summer. I'll just lastly say, definitely agree with Alan Pardew. Having covered Wolves a little bit in the last few years, João Gomez, I would be looking at him if I'm any top club in the Premier League. I think he is a brilliant midfielder, and maybe not seeing the best of him this year with Wolves struggling in the Premier League, but he is definitely someone who I think would be a really good option for a lot of top clubs to look at.
Yeah, no doubt he'll have plenty of suitors. Right, what about the left-back area? Is that where they want to strengthen as well?
Yeah, absolutely is, Vic. And let me just give you some context to this. With, again, as I mentioned, a return to European football looking ever more likely next season, they need options in different positions, of course. And you look at the left-back area, maybe something we haven't talked about a lot this year, with Luke Shaw really returning to some sort of fitness, being consistently fit. That's been great for him and for Manchester United, but he's also out of contract next summer. Terrell Malacia, another option, pretty much the backup option in that position for United this season. He runs out of his contract. His contract expires this summer, and it looks very likely he is to leave Old Trafford then as well. So Manchester United need to look long-term at those options. I know the likes of Nathaniel Brown at Eintracht Frankfurt is someone they're keeping very close tabs on, but also perhaps a new name to talk about, and I'm sure Keith can shed some more light on, is, from my understanding, Lewis Hall is also on Manchester United's list. He's of course had a very impressive season. He's been called up by England as well. Again, I'm not saying that Manchester United are maybe going to get that move done or even try and bid for him this summer, but he's certainly someone who's impressed at Old Trafford and someone United are long admirers of as well.
Brilliant, Dan. Thank you very much indeed. And Keith, I will pick up on Lewis Hall in just a minute with you, but I just want to talk to you, Alan, firstly. Does it feel like Manchester United are back at the top table, or indeed did they ever leave, but they've got a bit more bargaining power to get in the best players?
They definitely left the top table for a period. There's no doubt about that. Even with the history that they had, it was looking like they was on a downward spiral. I mean, when Amorim left, to say, if they'd have asked me to go in there and say, you've got to get us Champions League football, I said, I think that's highly unlikely with what I've got here. Michael Carrick has done an unbelievable job. And Steve in there, the coach, they've done they've got that turned around. They've had tremendous results. And Michael will be feeling it now. And just listening to those transfer rumours, will he be part of the conversation? I'm guessing he will be because of the success he's had. If he hadn't had success, he might not have been part of those conversations. So if he's got gets his hands and paws on the decision, I would suggest you would look for somebody perhaps like himself, which would make sense.
Yeah.
Because that creative, cultural kind of player that he was, first touch, opening up the pitch, etc., will be massively important for United. I see them Friday night, and Manu and Casemiro were excellent. I'm not exactly sure what Manu is at the moment. I think he's still trying to find his way. But if you looked at a couple of them options there, Tonali for sure would get in that team. But he'd get in that team as a number 8. Anderson, I slightly disagree with the reporter there in that I think he's a 6. He's the top interceptor in the Premier League by some distance. He reads the game so well. He's brilliant for Spurs on Sunday. So, they are the type of players that would fit that Man United model. With Casemiro going, there's an opportunity for somebody, and I'm just so really proud of Michael and what he's done there. It's remarkable, the position they're in with 8 games to go, or 7, whatever it is.
Yeah, and sorry, go on.
Vicky, if there was ever a question about Manchester United's pooling power, it was answered last summer. I mean, I'm obviously talking about Newcastle because I feel like I'm qualified to talk about it. They went for Brian Mbeumo. He chose Manchester United. They liked Matthias Cunha. He went to Manchester United. They got all the way down the line with Benjamin Sesko. He went to Manchester United. Without Champions League football, Newcastle had that. So they still do have that pooling power. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do this summer when they potentially have Champions League football in the locker as well. And it's amazing to see all these players, young players, who Manchester United might not have been we thought might not have been a huge thing for them as it came through the ranks. Clearly they are, and that is why they chose to go there last summer, and they're probably going to get Champions League football next season.
Well, probably. It looks nailed on, doesn't it? Because the other teams don't seem to want it. With all the defeats that Liverpool and Chelsea are picking up, they look nailed on for third place, don't they, in Champions League?
Man United are always going to be top of an agenda because of the status of the football club. But that doesn't mean to say that if they hadn't made Champions League football, that would slowly dissipate, and it would. It would. And as we've seen with Leeds United, what's happened to them over the years when they were so close to winning the Premier League, etc. I think Man United have got themselves in an excellent position. I don't think the Newcastle players, and I think Eddie's been quite strong about defending Gomes and Tonali in particular, because I'm not sure that transfer would be possible. I think Newcastle got the financial power to hold off, but it'd be interesting. That could be something they'll be looking forward to.
Look, I think there's a chance one could go of the two. I don't think both will be allowed to go. What Newcastle don't want is a repeat of last season when Alexander Isak dug his heels in, essentially went on strike. He went on strike.
Can they prevent that? Because they've got a bit of a blueprint of how to behave and getting what you want.
Well, what I mean by that is I think that if a player agitates to leave, or if a player says, look, I do want to try explore a new opportunity, I think they will be more open to it earlier on in the transfer window. Now, I know it's difficult in a World Cup year that Mark touches on, but I think they got their fingers burnt a bit last year, and they won't allow that to happen again. Yes, they want the true value of the player, but they don't want a situation where they're wheeling and dealing in the last day of the window, and then for Newcastle it bled into this season. There was a knock-on effect, and there was a cloud hanging over the club at the start of the season, and I think that was being reflected in results and performances and a general mood, and what is going to probably be their overall finish in the league. So with regards to Bruno Guimaraes and Sandro Tonali, I would say of the two, Sandro Tonali probably more likely to leave. However, he's contracted until 2030, so Newcastle could command a huge amount of money for him. But unless any player agitates to leave, Newcastle will be keen to hold on to them. I think with Bruno Guimaraes, and he's kind of been mentioned less in paper talk and whatnot, and I think with him, Newcastle as a football club and as a city, it's got under his skin. And Alan, you know what Newcastle's like in a place having managed up there, and when it does that to certain individuals and players, they find it hard to leave, and that's why I think him at 28 is more likely to stay of the two. I'm not saying Sandro Tonali definitely will go, but if I'm looking into a crystal ball, I think Tonali probably more likely.
Is this decision down to football or is it down to money?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it makes sense for Mo Salah. It also makes sense for Liverpool. If you go back to last April, he signed a new contract, 2-year contract, which would take him to the summer of 2027. Now, he's said to be the highest paid player in the history of Liverpool. There are reports that he earns between £350,000 and £400,000. Now, last season, he had an incredible season, scored something like 28, 29 goals. Liverpool won the title. He hasn't hit those peaks this season, but then again, nor have his teammates. So I think from a purely financial point of view, Liverpool will be looking at this and thinking he's going to be 34 in June. Do we really want to carry on paying him that kind of money next season as well? And from his own point of view, perhaps he's thinking, I've completed football at Liverpool. I've won everything there is to win. Maybe now is the right time for a change. That's why I think it has something to do with football, something to do with money, but I think ultimately it's the right decision for both parties.
Carve, where next?
I think everyone is presuming that he's going to go to Saudi Arabia. Why? Well, we know Al Ittihad in 2023 made a verbal offer of £150 million for him. We know that the Saudi Arabian sports minister has said that it would be a dream to have the greatest Arab player of all time playing in the Saudi Pro League. We know that everybody in football accepts the fact that one day Mo Salah will go and play in Saudi Arabia. But we do not know for sure that it is going to be this summer. Nothing has been agreed. Nothing has been signed. I can tell you tonight for a fact there'll be multiple clubs in Saudi Arabia who will be absolutely desperate to sign Mo Salah, especially because he will be a free agent. But I can also tell you for a fact that there will be clubs in America who want to sign him. There will be clubs all across Europe who will want to sign him. There are clubs in the Premier League who want to sign him as well.
Since joining Liverpool in 2017, Mo Salah has established himself as one of the best players in Liverpool history. But what legacy does he leave at this club?
It's shock. I'm in shock right now to even be talking about this right now. It's a bit bittersweet because it almost feels like there's unfinished business to the end of the season. But in terms of legacy, there's no doubt Mohamed Salah is a living legend, right? He'll go down as one of Liverpool's greatest ever players. And I'm really interested to see how he continues the rest of the way. But he's been an African footballing legend as well. And as someone who played in African football, as someone who was actually supposed to make his debut in African football against Mohamed Salah, this is surreal.
A huge moment happening, you can see, in terms of what he has done, not just for Liverpool, but in the Premier League, in Champions League. The list goes on and on. And for more on this announcement, we are pleased to welcome in CBS Sports English football correspondent James Benge. Hey, James, welcome in. It is so good to chat with you about this and big news. As Michael said, we're a little bit shocked here, but tell me a little bit more about this because Mo Salah had another year on his contract. He just re-signed one more year at Liverpool. Why is this decision coming now?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, the question might really be, why did this not happen last year when Mohamed Salah was on top of the world? Probably the best individual season that a Premier League player has had. And he had the chance to move on, but I think he felt that he had unfinished business in Europe at the highest level, and he wanted to continue this story with Liverpool. For both parties, it hasn't gone quite in the direction they were hoping. Salah's own form has dropped off somewhat. He's not been maybe as bad as some have said, but his form has dropped off. It's been harder to justify paying him £400,000 a week, as Liverpool are understood to pay him. And of course, tensions really frayed as Liverpool's own form struggled. In December, he said that he felt like he'd been thrown under the bus by the club when he was placed on the substitutes bench very frequently, and although after the Africa Cup of Nations he sort of came back into the side and his form's not been that bad, it's quite apparent that you couldn't really justify another season of this either for Salah or for Liverpool. So while sort of like Mike, my initial reaction was shock at the in the moment announcement, I don't think it's really that much of a surprise that Salah isn't seeing out year 2 of this contract.
So it's not a surprise that it's actually happening, but what about the manner, right? He has agreed to leave Liverpool. Liverpool has allowed him to leave at the end of the season. To me, free agent comes to mind, but how is this deal being finalized?
Yeah, Salah is leaving as a free agent. In many ways, this sort of reflects what we reported on CBSSports.com back in December, when this was at its crescendo. And it was very clear then that the obvious landing spot for Salah, and I know we'll come on to talk about potential destinations, but the obvious landing spot of Saudi Arabia, the clubs there were not really minded to pay Liverpool much of a fee, if any at all, to sign Salah. Salah would get a out of this world extraordinary personal package, but Saudi Arabia were looking at this and saying, you've got a player that isn't performing as he used to, that you probably want to move on from. We're not going to pay you to take him off your hands. And frankly, if the Saudi Pro League clubs are not minded to pay a transfer fee for your 33-year-old on £400,000 a week, it's going to be a real struggle to find anyone elsewhere. So to an extent, just kind of cutting the cord now allows Salah to have his farewell that he has absolutely earned. It allows Liverpool to start their planning, and it probably means you don't kind of waste time trying to drum up a transfer fee that in all likelihood I think wouldn't have come.